Hi, I'm Mike. I make Kumiko, among other things. Recently, I came out for the very first time to an art show to display my work. Um, and one of the pieces that was on display, which garnered a lot of attention, was a piece of Sakura. Unfortunately, it wasn't for sale, as it was a gift from my wife Christine, so I simply wanted to demonstrate it and show it. And while I did have another piece of Sakura there, it was done with resins and color, and it was a different kind of presentation. The piece of Sakura, or cherry blossom, that a lot of people were interested in, was a more traditional, straightforward presentation, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make another piece. It won't be identical to that, but it'll be very similar. So I've made my jigumi, my frame. But what's fun and challenging and interesting about it is making the little pieces that fit in the trapezoids, and those pieces are a little bit fussy to make. So I've milled a piece of 1/4-inch basswood. Once I get that, I'm going to chop them up into 3/8 inch pieces, because that's the depth of my jigumi, is 3/8 of an inch. And I'm doing that on this dinky little tabletop table saw that I bought for this sort of purpose. I've been using a little chop saw, which you might have seen in another of my videos. The bearings are starting to go on that, and rather than trying to fix it, it was a very cheap saw anyway. I bought this little unit, which is a lot easier for me to use, because I'm simply zing, 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 zinging across this open blade. I do have to be careful about my fingers, but I'm fairly careful in that regard. Once I have a pile of pieces, I'm stuffing them into this, what's called a Sakura shuttle, which I obtained and I bought from Johnny Trombucas on his website, and it helps me to cut the groove onto these little trapezoid pieces, and I'm simply using my table saw to do this. But basically, yeah, it's a little clamp vice arrangement, this Sakura shuttle, and so I'm just stuffing pieces in, like loading shells into a carbine. And once I get them full, I'm lining them up with my table saw. They're very carefully measured to cut a groove down the center. And so I load the shuttle up, I tighten the bolts, I tighten the clamps so the pieces don't move, and then I run it across my blade, which is raised just enough to cut the groove to the depth that I want. The thing about Kumiko that always catches me up is just the sheer numbers of pieces that you need. I was cutting a lot of these little trapezoid pieces thinking I had enough. I'm short. I still need to cut another, I think, 29 or 30 to fill every space, to fill every one of these triangles within this jigumi. This is not a particularly big piece. It's maybe 20, 21 inches by what, 3 inches, 4 inches? But there are 40 triangular spaces, and each space, as they say, takes 3 trapezoid pieces. So, I mean, doing the math, that's 120 pieces. That's a lot of pieces. That's a lot of stock. So I'm always surprised by that. And then you look at the finished piece at the end of the day, you don't really think about that. But yeah, you can be cutting hundreds of pieces, and this is where a lot of the time and the labor and the effort comes in. And the stock. It's funny how much stock you go through before you know it. But yeah, so I have to cut another 30 pieces before I can get to work on this. Wow, that was too short. I'm doing a lot of custom fitting on this particular piece of Sakura, mostly because it's my own fault. I changed the depth of cut when I was cutting those little trapezoid pieces. I changed the depth of cut. And then, of course, I mixed up the volume of pieces I'd produced. And so when I put those little trapezoid pieces, or those little pieces in, they were mixed up. And so there are varying depths. So in the infill pieces that form the pedal, I'm having to, they're all roughly the same, but I'm having to fine tune and roughly cut, or sorry, very finely cut pieces that are specific to a particular part. Simply because I messed up. I should be able to cut a whole bunch of pieces that are the same, but in this case, you always have to adapt. There's always going to be, no matter what, there's always some fudging and fine-tuning you have to do to fit parts. But I more or less cut everything to length, and if I just need to shorten a little piece, I will take the butt end of it and I'll place it in handy dandy little my little bench plane, my miniature Veritas bench plane, that is proving to be far more useful than I ever thought it would be. Which is I'm using it for exactly its intended purpose, which is to square in. So I can put my 30-degree bevels on the locking pieces, and then if I need to shorten them up a little bit, I'll just take them and I'll just square off the end. I'll shoot them in my little bench plane, my little shooting plane, to make them fit. So all that custom fitting, that's my bad. It's just, and I knew at the time that I was probably going to mess myself up, but you shouldn't change something halfway through. Don't change horses midstream. And I did, but that's just sometimes the way I work. One of the unintended consequences of having to fudge pieces to make them fit, because they're not all the same, is exactly that. I think in there lies the strength. Nature, as beautiful as it is not perfect. So I don't mind in these pieces seeing something that's not always exactly uniform. You know, if you stare at it, you might think, well, that piece is a little bit longer than that piece, or, you know, there are some variations within it, because that's nature, that's life. It wasn't something I intended to do, but at the same time, I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all, because it is imperfect, like we are, like I am. I'm a human being. I mean, you could have this stuff cut by a CNC machine. You could build something like this on a what do you call them? The printers, the 3D printers. You could print something like this and it would be absolutely perfect. But yeah, it would be crap.